Welcome. I'm Bill Haney. Let's have a conversation. Our guest today is Jack Lessenberry, who is making a return visit, actually. Jack was here a year or so ago on his book called Reason versus Racism. He's been a writer for many, many years for national and regional publications, as well as doing television, radio, and professing at Wayne State and the University of Michigan. He's written for Vanity Fair, Esquire, George, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, quite a roster. And he's now a contributing editor and a columnist for the Toledo Blade and other newspapers. Jack won a national Emmy in '95 for one of two frontline documentaries that he helped report and produce on Jack Kevorkian, and is co-author of many books. The People's Lawyer, The Life and Times of Frank Kelly, who was the longest serving, I think that's part of the subtitle of the book, the longest serving Attorney General in the country. That was published by Wayne State University Press in '15. And he did the Reason versus Racism book about 2 years ago, Jack?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And he co-authored the book we'll talk about today, which is on the Judge Avern Cohn, who had a distinguished career here as a lawyer and then as a judge, a federal judge in the Eastern District of Michigan.
Michigan's divided into two districts, an eastern and a western.
Right, and he did Eastern. And Jack co-authored that with Elizabeth Zurich, who, that was a pretty smart of you because she's an archivist and librarian.
Not to mention my spouse
and
also,
best friend. Yes, your significant other and partner for life.
Exactly.
Now, I know that since then, with that experience and a lot of experience you've had in books behind you, then you founded a new book publishing company, and you'll be doing books by other authors, the old classic books.
Well, we're hoping so, Bill. I want to thank you for that introduction, and thank you especially for inviting me back for a return visit. Yeah. You know, you don't always get a second date, but when you do, you feel honored. But sure, and I guess I really do need to give you credit for suggesting this, and it really was helpful in this instance because I felt we could get a publisher for the Avern Cohn book, but Avern Cohn was 97, and I wanted to make sure that he had a chance to enjoy it, and in fact we did. The book came out beginning of November. He was able to have a huge party, and in February, unfortunately, he suddenly died. So if we'd gone to a conventional publisher, I don't think he would have lived to see the book.
I agree, and full disclosure, I did not know Avern and his wife Lois well, but I knew them, and it seemed to me important. And I consulted with Jack a bit, full disclosure, on his previous books and on this one. I think that was really more important to give his friends and colleagues an opportunity to spend some time with him. It turned out very nice, the Franklin Hills Country Club, and Avern seemed to enjoy it mightily.
It was a great event, and he was fortunate in that he was totally lucid. His body wore out, Bill, but he died on February 4th. On February 1st, I was on the phone with him talking about his latest article that he'd written.
Wow. Yes, he had quite a mind. I was fortunate. He invited me a year or two ago to have lunch with him at his offices in the Federal Building. And we had a delightful lunch, but he had an ulterior motive because he was quite a fanatic Detroit Tigers fan.
Right.
And had quite a collection of stuff. And he wanted to talk some baseball. He knew that I had done the Ernie Harwell books, and we had chatted a little bit about baseball. But that was a delightful lunch. And he really did have quite a memory, quite a sharp mind.
He remembered collecting money for a charity to build what's now the old Shari Zedek Temple in 1930.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, he goes way back. And I know that mind really served him well. And in his role as a judge. And in fact, the title of this book is because he was so impressed with Justice Brandeis, who I think that was more or less his motto.
Well, actually, that's not quite true. He mentioned that to me, but when I was reading all of his decisions, that was the thing that stood out. That he was a often sort of cranky guy. He could yell at people, but his humanity, his compassion for people, and he said, well, that's something that Justice Louis Brandeis said during his confirmation hearings. His goal was to think about the other fella, not be able to have necessarily sympathy for him, but have empathy, to be able to put himself in their place. And so I thought that really defined his legal career, and that's why we picked the title.
Well, he also tried to be as even-handed and fair as he could, even though you're right. I know he was capable of making caustic comments when he felt people were out of line. But he said he always tried to remind himself that the lawyers had as much right to be in that courtroom as he did.
That's right. In fact, it was Elizabeth's idea. If the end papers of the book, he would write these little notes to himself that nobody could see and stick up behind the bench, like just what you said, the lawyers have a right to be here too, keep cool, don't get your temper up. As far as I know, he never paid much attention to those notes, but he did put them up there.
He had his heart in the right place.
That's right, he had his heart in the right place.
Well, that's why this became such an interesting book, because it shows many dimensions of the man. And I think you're right, the end leaves, the printed papers at the beginning with these notes, give an insight into him, which is really good, because some of the chapters of the book then are more rigorous in terms of how it's, and have to be. I recall, is it Kearns? Was he the
inventor of the windshield?
The windshield wiper case.
Wiper.
He handled some of the really most controversial and important cases. Yeah.
He certainly did. I think we should say this is not a standard biography. It starts with somebody being born and goes through their whole life. There is some of that, but it's also a collection. The heart of the book is an examination I did of his most important legal cases. But then he was quite a writer himself. He wrote a lot of articles, some on law, but mainland history. He was a Michigan history buff, and so I said we have to include some of your work, which we did.
Yeah, it covers the spectrum quite well. He handled the busing case, didn't he?
The Detroit busing case. What happened, everybody knows that the U.S. Supreme Court said you couldn't, in Bradley versus Milliken, you couldn't bus people across city lines. You couldn't bus kids in the suburbs and vice versa. But they did say you've got a total right to bus within your city. And at that time, Detroit schools, of course now Detroit schools are virtually all African American, but at the time that wasn't the case, and there was discrimination, and he handled all of that as long as the case lasted. And at some point he made the determination these schools are essentially all black anyway, there's nothing more than can be accomplished, and he ended the case. He
handled some cases on issues that have since evolved considerably. I'm thinking of the Butcher case. I knew Mary Lou. I knew Mary Lou well, and that was a fascinating case. And now, of course, things have evolved substantially.
Sure, as a pioneer in the rights of women in journalism, Mary Lou Butcher was a reporter for the Detroit News. Women were not getting equal treatment, either in terms of pay or assignments, and they sued. And he handled that case, and there was eventually a settlement. And now, of course, there are probably more women journalists than there are men.
Yeah, it's the industry has changed dramatically, and fortunately, the treatment of women and the compensation levels. And I discussed that with him a little bit, because my prejudice when I was hiring people was that you pay the job. Whether gender doesn't enter into it, frankly, I don't think seniority should. I think if a job is worth something, and he concurred with that, and that's what we're still striving for. There's been a lot of evolution in that area, but it's still a ways away from full equity.
Well, that's exactly right, and he was a mentor for many women lawyers and women judges, and he mentored a couple women who became federal magistrate judges.
Did not know that, yeah. He did, there was another case that was controversial too, was the Coe case.
The Doe case?
Doe.
Yeah, versus
Yeah.
University of Michigan. He had a couple interesting free speech cases sort of at the dawn of the internet. One, as far as the Doe versus the University of Michigan. This is somebody who had fantasies and wrote about them online,
Doe,
and he said there's no danger that this person is a little off, but he's presenting no danger to anybody. There was also another case of somebody who was posting horrible, lurid stories on the internet, and it was I think it was in 1995. Again, he wrote a story about violence and murder and used a female classmate's name, and of course she freaked out, understandably. But he said this is distasteful, but he has a right to do that. And what's interesting, Bill, when you read that decision, he has to explain to people what the internet is.
Oh my
Because
goodness.
it was the early
It was that
90s,
yeah.
and how you get online and what that meant. And but it's still, those cases have still influenced law of free speech. He was a proud alumnus of the University of Michigan. He told me he didn't know there was any other university when he went there, but he ruled against them. And he said, you're free. What they had come up with was an early hate speech code about hate speech on campus, but it was way too broad. It violated people's freedom of speech, and he just threw it out. But he had a funny sense of humor. One little aside, the University of Michigan had written a pamphlet in University of Michigan maize colors of how to administrate this. And they realized this pamphlet's no good, so they threw it out. And he said to the U of M's lawyer in court, you're taking the maize out of the maize and blue?
I love it. Yeah, he did have a good sense of humor. Did you get response from others? It's still early on because the book hasn't really been out very long. But I presume that it's in the hands of reviewers. But have you had much reaction yet?
People have loved it. They've just loved the book. Of course, they love him. I've gotten very nice reaction. We've had orders for this book from as far away as Japan. I sent one to Hawaii yesterday because he touched the lives of so many people. A woman from the United Arab Emirates who this is a woman who was accused of betraying the country. She'd worked for the FBI and the CIA. And Avern looked at this case, and she said, I'm worried. I'm an Arab American. She was an immigrant, had gone to work for a country, been accused of spying. So she's got somebody who's the most prominent person in the Detroit Jewish community as her judge. So he looks at this case and basically just gave the worst tongue lashing in the world to the federal prosecutor, said, you're ruining this woman's life, you have no case.
Wow.
60 Minutes took it up. She was completely exonerated. They gave her her citizenship back, and the prosecution and the press, who had called her things like Jihad Jane, they ran out of that courtroom with their tails between their legs.
Wow. Well, you had a head start on doing this book then with Elizabeth already being knowledgeable about this material.
Sure, we should have mentioned, Elizabeth has been his private archivist for a long time. And of course, I've known Avern, everybody's known Avern, because there was no more prolific letter writer than Avern Cohn. And any journalist, starting in the early 1980s, I would get letters from him. I like this, or you should have thought about that. He was almost invariably right.
An art form that's very near to my heart, letter writing, and I hope it's making a little bit of a comeback.
Oh, me too.
Yeah. The process of doing this book and doing your previous one, Reason versus Racism, now did that contribute to you making the decision to found Old Classic Books, your new venture?
That's right. And I thought, we should have a way. What you taught me, Bill, we think of vanity press books, and we've all seen bad vanity press books. Someone writes a half-literate memoir and pays someone to publish it. That's not what this is, because we formed the publishing company. We made sure the name wasn't, we legally registered the name, set it up as a business. It has, Elizabeth is a librarian, so she knew how to get an ISBN number so it could be sold in libraries. It has a barcode. I copyrighted it. Copywriting was a little bit of a challenge in this book because some of it is previously included material, and so I had to have a go around with the Copyright Office, but that eventually all got settled. And of course, the only person who didn't believe in the book was Avern, not because he didn't believe in us, he didn't believe he was important enough to read about. And he said, I don't want to do it, and if you do it, don't do any more than 100 copies. And I didn't listen to him. And we had 400 copies out the door before you could say,
Well, it's a beautiful book, too. It's not just that it's gathered this material that would be lost for posterity for most readers.
Well, you
Otherwise-
know better than anyone, Bill, putting together a book is akin to building a building. It is so complex if you do it right. And thanks to you, we hired a lovely page designer, very talented young woman who was up near Interlaken. We had a publisher based in Chelsea, printing presses in Grand Rapids. So you assemble a team. And this book didn't have an index, but again, that's another thing. You've got so much proofreading, the process, the pictures, getting the pictures, and some of this presents a challenge in the time of COVID.
It is. It's a major organizational effort. It's far more than just the manuscript itself.
Right.
And I think that's why you use the term and used it properly, I think. Vanity publishing, Vanity Press books are self-published books. People who think they can do the whole thing.
Right.
And my experience has been that there are so many decisions to make in doing a book, and if you do make the wrong choice on any one of them, you flaw the book, and maybe even ruin the book.
Right.
And what you're doing, and what I encourage other people to do if they're really serious about it, is to use people like you used, the young woman who is very talented. Her name is Annie Zemansky, who has her own business and had done children's books.
Oh yeah, she's an illustrator too.
Yeah,
That's right.
and so you were fortunate. You found someone who combines several of the key ingredients. So it was like one-stop shopping because she could do these other things, and not many people can. And that's what one might call private publishing or small press publishing, which is a very important thing because New York publishers, many of them are folks who have been in the business they've seen it all.
Right.
and in New York, and I know a lot of them, and some are very, very good, but some tend to be provincial on behalf of New York.
They're professional in a different way.
Yeah.
And also, your book manuscript is going to be looked at by some 28-year-old acquisitions editor who doesn't know about anything that happened before about the Obama administration.
And many books, there are many good books that will never get published because they can't run the gauntlet and get past that 28-year-old person who hasn't seen that much of life and reads a page or two and then sets it aside. And on the other hand, a lot of celebrity books get done, and you can then go buy them in the remainder bin a year later for a couple dollars.
That's right.
So what you're doing here with old classic books, I think is in the best tradition of book publishing.
Well, that means a lot to me because you've been godfather for more than 400 books. You've run a couple presses, founded your own very thriving press back in the day, and your opinion means more to me, I think, than anybody else's along this thing. And you're right, because Avern Cohn, there is no attorney in Michigan who did not know Avern Cohn, and no judge who didn't know him. But he's not important in New York and California. He's very important here, so you wouldn't want a press run of 100,000 copies.
Yeah. No, but this book had to be done. I mean, it just would have been wrong with the incredible career he had and the contributions that he made, what he stood for. That just deserved going out and cutting down a whole number of trees that you must have done to make this book.
And both you and I'm sure you more than I, but I've turned down a manuscript. I mean, if somebody comes to you, they don't really want professional editing, they don't want to do it the right way, you cheerfully say thanks, but no thanks. But if we have a minute, I'd like you have wonderful rules that are embedded in my head for how you decide to do a book. Would you mind stating those?
Yeah, it's worked for me over the years because you can have the right answer to 3 of these, but then stumble. But I only did books that hadn't been done before. If somebody else had done it, I didn't want to do a Me Too book.
Right.
I wanted to do a book that I could bring something to, and that didn't necessarily mean I was an expert.
Right.
You know, with the Ernie Harwell books, I knew a bit about baseball in Detroit, and Ernie knew that I did, and so that was a good partnership in doing Tune to Baseball and the rest of Ernie's books. So bring something to the party, and then could you then do it in a successful way? And that didn't mean necessarily sale of a lot of copies and making money, because frankly, most books don't make money. It's a question of how much do they lose.
The last statistic I saw was 3% of books make money.
That sounds about right. Yeah, and they don't make serious money. Only a fraction of those really,
Right.
and that's what New York publishers do. And I'm not here to knock New York publishers. They do a lot of good stuff, but they're in business. And they will figure we've got to have one hit, one
Right.
big one.
Right.
You know, our friend Elmore Leonard,
Sure.
Dutch Leonard, published 45 books over the years. His first one was appropriately called The Big Bounce, because he got bounced 84 times before he found a publisher. And then it failed. And he turned to Westerns, and he wrote some very good ones, and then to crime fiction. But it took him years before he found his voice, which is really important, you know.
And he became one of the most successful mystery writers in the
Absolutely.
country. Can I tell you a fast story about Elmer Leonard and Avern Cohn?
Please.
Avern Cohn, they had to raise money for a charity. Whoever gave the biggest bid, Elmore Leonard promised to name a character in his next book after them. So Avern Cohn won this. And then he named, in whatever the next novel was, the sleaziest, most corrupt lawyer in the book was named Avern Cohn. And somebody wrote to the New York Times and said, "This is outrageous, this man is a wonderful judge." He wasn't, and then there's another letter saying, well, he wasn't in on the joke. And then we asked Avern, how'd you feel when you found out that? He said, oi, oi, oi. I said, were you upset? He said, no, the only person who would have been upset would have been my mother, and she's no longer living.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like Avern. Well, to tell you the last of those Haney principles for whether you do a book or not, and that is, will it be fun?
Exactly.
Will it be enjoyable? Because it's book publishing at its best is a collegial enterprise, and life is too short, I feel, to get into something and have it be drudgery. And I tell people, would-be authors, that if you're going to do a book, first of all, stop talking about it and
Right.
start writing.
That's right.
And then another is get ready to be obsessed. Because if I don't know that you can do a decent book unless you really commit to it that way, so that it's always in the back of your mind. No matter what else you're doing, that
That's
book
right.
is working, and I think you found that out.
Somebody said it was like giving birth to a baby. You know, you're wrestling with this thing for at least 9 months, sometimes longer.
Well, most female authors will tell you, yeah, I've heard that, but it's harder, they say, than having a baby. It really, and it goes forever. And then you get the postpartum thing, which is, now you've been with this thing for a year, 2, 5 years,
Right.
and now it's gone and behind you. You got to adjust. Well, Jack, I'm delighted that you came out here to talk with us about this book today and about books in general.
It's a privilege and an honor to talk with you anywhere, Bill, but it's an honor to be on your show.
Well, thank you, Jack. I really enjoyed it, and I hope our viewers did, and I hope they're prepared to tune in before too much longer with another episode of Conversations with Bill.